Hello, and welcome back to episode 27 of The Quick Pink Brain Tripped Over the Lazy Dog. I'm your host, Skip McClellan, and I'm joined by special guest and frequent test subject, Reese Muffin. Pleasure to be here, Skip. On this episode, we are diving into the fascinating topic of emotion recognition and discrimination. We'll be analyzing sets of emotional faces, discussing the science behind your brain interprets a smile versus a Draco Malfoy smirk, and finally, discussing how this relates to everything we've discussed in previous episodes. I'm so excited to be here, Skip. Yeah, thanks, Reese. Me too.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
Do? Why, if I had a brain, I could
while away the hours, conferring with the flowers, consulting with the rain. And my head I'd be scratching while my thoughts were busy hatching if I only had a brain.
Reese, how's your poker face? Oh man, I haven't really got one. Let me think. As a youth, whenever anything would go wrong in the neighborhood, like if my older sis accidentally spilt the margarine on the linoleum, I was always blamed on me because my face would go redder than anything. I bet it felt something similar to what my mum felt when I was matching those cards earlier. Precisely, Reese. And what Reese was talking about was the emotion recognition task we did earlier today. Essentially, Reese had to sort 20 different pictures of the same man's face, all with different expressions. There were two forms of sorting the faces. The first was matching each picture to one of 6 terms: happy, sad, disgust, anger, fear, and surprise. How did that go, Reese? I felt as though this was the easiest way, although I wish I could maybe use 2 words on the same card. It was like often a card that looked sad also had disgust in it, and on top of that, disgust was really difficult to separate from anger. But I was always sure when a face looked happy, I had no doubt about it. If it was happy, it was happy. Reese, I'm amped about that result. What about the other method? Could you describe how that one worked? Yeah, right. Well, the second method was much harder. It was a circle. Imagine this. It was a circle divided into 4 quadrants. In math terms, the x-axis, the horizontal axis, left to right, went from displeasure to pleasure, and the y-axis went bottom to top from low arousal to high arousal. So, if you imagine, feeling brilliant went in the top right quadrant, and feeling relaxed in the bottom right, feeling like rubbish in the bottom left, and feeling absolutely furious in the top left. Right, so if we haven't lost you, my experience was in shambles. If I had only had 4 different faces, it may have been easier. But with 20 different faces, I always started second-guessing myself, right? Is one more aroused than another? Or is one showing a sign of sadness? Or is that some kind of glum, maybe surprise look? I don't know. I think the main thing is that the faces weren't super realistic. What do you mean by that, Reese? Yeah, thanks for asking, Skip. Right. I mean, to day, you know, if I see a bugger in the queue at the shop and he's really starting to get me razzled, I'm not gonna twist my face up in a knot and show the whole lot, everybody in the queue. But I definitely will feel really frustrated on the inside. And maybe that's what society has taught me, to use a poker face. So maybe mine's not so bad after all, Skip. Fantastic. Great observation. Based on your experience with the methods, I think it would be safe to say that your results may have been different if, for example, each face had like a context and maybe some body language to use. There are a lot more tells than just a smile, like posture, gesture, even the timbre of someone's voice. Would you agree? I'd agree better than a mule lapping up a puddle, Skip. Without a scene to match a face, it's rarely difficult. Now a word from our sponsor. The answer has never been more straightforward. Now introducing social snag glasses. You've tried time limits on apps, but it hasn't worked. It's time to see through a new lens. Our glasses use infrared technology to block your view of the apps that you wish to avoid. Remember, glasses on, virtual reality out. Now back to your program. This part of the show is all about how our topic relates to neuroscience as a whole, so let's check it out. Social and emotion cognition is a high cortical level ability with an unrivaled level of complexity compared to all other planetary species. All Reese relied on earlier were his eyes, which sent information he viewed straight to his occipital lobe for further processing. Reese had never seen this face in real life before, yet he was able to reference prior knowledge from deep in his hippocampus and take mental measurements of this new face, figuring out if the face looked happy versus sad, depressed versus elated, etc., 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 etc. Emotional cognition, a separate process to identifying who someone is, has a high and a low road. I mean, two different pathways throughout the cortex and brainstem. Fear is an emotion when displayed in the brain that goes through the low road, being an automatic expression. But sensing things like disgust has to do with physical areas that are higher up in the cortex. Combining these two things is a complex process that includes communication from very different brain areas, and there are likely many different pathways between them. This makes sense as to why it's so confusing when trying to differentiate 10 faces with subtle varying signs of anger, fear, and disgust. Deficits in emotion recognition show very similar deficits in visual recognition. When someone's amygdala, or their fear center in the brain, is damaged, they will struggle to recognize terror in others, but when seeing a bright smile, it will easily elicit the recognition of happiness. In visual recognition, there is a disorder called agnosia, in which there is a cortical inability to recognize objects they can see with perfect vision. Depending on where the lesion is, it can either pertain to objects, visual agnosia, or faces, prosopagnosia. This is all evidence that the brain is constantly combining information from separate brain areas to make singular conclusions, like whether Sally is happy or sad that her ice cream fell on the pavement. Well, what was she, Skip? Happy or sad? I think we can both safely assume that she was ecstatic. She hates strawberry ice cream. Thanks for tuning into our show. Be sure to check out the rest of our episodes on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. The quick pink brain lives!
I would dance and be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain.